You're tuned into Auto Intelligence, live from Auto Trader, where data, tools, and your preferences sync to make your car shopping smooth.
They're searching inventory.
Oh, yeah.
They find what you need.
They're gonna find it.
You can make a budget for your wallet to help you succeed. Pricing's precise and true.
So true.
It's smarter car shopping.
Ooh.
Just for you.
Oh, it's just for you.
Ooh.
Find your next ride at autotrader.com. Powered by Auto Intelligence.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info. And if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Hey, difference makers. A quick pause before we dive into the episode. If you've been enjoying these conversations and you want to take the impact even deeper, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to my Substack newsletter. It's where I unpack the behind-the-scenes insights from each episode of A World of Difference and share practical, thought-provoking tools on trauma-informed leadership across cultures, inclusive talent development in global organizations, what the most forward-thinking CHROs and CEOs are doing right now, and how you can make an impact in your workplace, whether in nonprofit, business, or faith-based spaces. When you subscribe, you'll instantly get my free guide, 3 Strategies for Trauma-Informed Leadership. Is it designed for leaders navigating cross-cultural teams and high-change environments? Just head to loriadamsbrown.substack.com or click the link in the show notes to sign up. That's loriadamsbrown.substack.com, where leadership meets purpose, values, and difference becomes our greatest strength. All right, let's get back to the show, because our world is different, and we were born to make a difference in it. Welcome to the A World of Difference podcast. I'm Lori Adams Brown, and this is a podcast for those who are different and want to make a difference. What if the very traits you've been told make you too much are actually your greatest leadership superpowers? Today's guest, Rachel Radway, knows exactly what it's like to be a high-achieving, highly perceptive leader in a world that doesn't always understand how you think, feel, and process. She's a certified leadership coach, a mentor, a speaker, and an author with over 25 years of experience in corporate leadership roles across tech startups, national nonprofits, and global enterprises. Rachel has helped countless neurodivergent and highly perceptive leaders rewrite the rules so they can lead with confidence, clarity, and authenticity without burning out. She's also lived in 9 countries, studied 9 languages, and has a very strong global mindset. And in her new book, Perceptive, which is making waves, she's earning rave reviews and endorsements from leaders across industries. So stick with us, and because today's conversation will change the way you see yourself, I really want to invite you in to listen to understand what she has to say about Perceptive, her experience, and many people that she's been coaching, because it's going to change you and your leadership potentially forever. Hello, Rachel, and just a very, very warm welcome to you on this sunny day here in California to A World of Difference podcast.
Thank you so much, Lori. I am thrilled to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Me too. We were introduced by our mutual friend, Minette, and if you haven't heard that episode, please go listen to Minette Norman as she talks about all kinds of things around inclusion at work and psychological safety and themes we unpack quite a bit here on the podcast. And today we have with us Rachel, who you've already been introduced to, and we're going to talk a bit about her latest book, which I have here in my hands and was grateful to get a copy of, called Perceptive. So Rachel, just right out the gate, I'd love to know a little bit more about your why behind this book. Everybody has one, and I want to know kind of who you were writing for. What do you hope those readers will take away from this book when they read it?
Absolutely. And it's funny. I have been a writer all my life, and I had thought about writing a lot of other books, and I've been published in other books. But this book was not something I had intended to write. I was talked into it a little bit, but the person who convinced me to do it was right, and I am so glad that he did. I work with clients who may identify as either highly sensitive or neurodivergent, or simply just wired a little differently. They know their brain functions a little bit differently from people around them. I also work with a lot of people who have never heard those terms or are not familiar with those terms, and still have gotten messages since childhood that they needed to grow a thicker skin, or they couldn't have the quiet that they were looking for, or they were just broken or doing things wrong. And the message of Perceptive is that none of us are broken, none of us are crazy, and none of us are alone, that we all have gifts, and especially those of us who are wired a little differently in whatever ways that might be, have a huge number of gifts. I sometimes call them superpowers. I know that there are people who have an issue with that word, and we can talk about it if the subject comes up. But we tend to focus, it's just human nature to focus on the challenges. And those are the things that are, what stop us in our tracks, no matter how much we've achieved. So we tend to forget about some of the positive things. The message is really that, first of all, a very well-kept secret is we are all wired differently. All of our brains are different. We all have gifts. We all have superpowers, and we all have challenges. And learning about the way we each are wired personally, and learning to embrace and acknowledge the gifts and the strengths that we have, and to use them, can help us manage the challenges and the other things more effectively, and can also really help us reframe a lot of things in our life, patterns and struggles and all kinds of things that we may have been particularly hard on ourselves about. Because a lot of the people I work with are extremely hard on themselves. We have very, very high expectations for other people too, but most importantly for ourselves. And sometimes those expectations are unrealistic, and we don't celebrate the wins that come. So that's really that's why I wrote the book. And it's targeted to two different audiences. One is anyone who has ever heard those messages, you're too sensitive, or you need to change the way you do things. The other is anyone who works with people, manages people, leads people, has impact on a workplace environment, for example. There are a lot of statistics that we could talk about, but what the most important thing is that the incidence of high sensitivity and neurodivergence is so much higher than we actually know. And there are a lot of people out there who are wired differently and may or may not disclose it, may or may not even recognize it themselves. But basically, that second audience is almost anyone who's out there, because we all have impact on the environment that we're working in.
Yes, absolutely we do. And here as difference makers, I hope this has already piqued your interest, because many of you are, or people who would be in this first category that she was speaking about. So we would frame that as neurodivergent, highly sensitive, lots of different terms out there. And yes, I do sit here like Rachel in Silicon Valley, where maybe our percentages are slightly higher for who knows, various types of reasons. But the reality is, in our workplaces and in our communities and in our families everywhere, like she said, there is a diversity, cognitive diversity that exists. And it exists also in the way that our brains and our bodies and nervous systems experience the world. I love this title, Perceptive. I'm really wondering what it means to you and why you chose that one.
So when I started my coaching work, it took me a little while to figure out exactly who I wanted to work with. I knew that I wanted to work with women leaders. That was where I started out. And since I came from tech, that was naturally kind of the way that I was oriented. What it took me a while to realize was that all of the clients who were drawn to me at first, and it continues to this day, shared some specific traits that I have personally. There is a book called The Highly Sensitive Person that was written by a psychologist named Elaine Aron in the late 80s. I read that book a few years after it first came out, and it was eye-opening for me. And one of the things that the book talks about is that 30% of the population is highly sensitive. And sensitivity can manifest in a lot of different ways. It can be environmental sensitivity, where you're responding or noticing different stimuli that a lot of people around you may not be noticing or responding to, which could include sound, it could include different kinds of lighting, it could include cigarette smoke or textures on your clothing or tags, it could include changes in temperature, scents, taste, smells and tastes and things like that. It can also include emotions, energies. And you might be very sensitive to some of those things and not to others. You might be sensitive to all of them. Sensitivity is it's a maligned word in our culture. It has a stigma that is wrongly associated with it. And it's just very misunderstood, especially when you are working with leaders, and even more especially when you're working with women leaders who have their own challenges in the corporate world. The last thing that many people want to be considered is sensitive. It is a word that people automatically have a certain kind of reaction to. And there are other books out there in the world that are oriented toward highly sensitive people. There are books called Sensitive. I specifically wanted to get across the idea that there are so many positives about this collection of traits. So I didn't want to use a word that was immediately going to turn people off. The person who persuaded me to write the book was actually the one who threw out the word perceptive and just asked me if I'd considered it. And I started thinking about it from different angles. And to me, it's funny because somebody on LinkedIn just yesterday asked me what perceptive means to me. And it has a lot of different angles to it. I think it includes discernment, being able to discern things, whether that's energetic or emotional or, again, things in our environment. It is making connections. I think there's an element of intuition to it. And it seems to be a universally positive word. It only has positive connotations. And when I started matching the two things up, there is so much of an overlap between sensitivity and perception that it made sense to look at what perception means in all of the contexts that I was talking about. So that's where the name came from.
It's such a great choice. And like you said, it does have such a positive connotation. And, I think many women will resonate as what you mentioned. Some women often get called sensitive when they are pointing out all kinds of, warning of a red flag in a toxic work environment, for example, or if they've been bullied at work or observed bullying. Some people, especially women, might be called sensitive as a substitute for hysterical and a lot of stereotypes we have around women. But like you said, perceptive is a positive thing. Look how perceptive she is. That sounds much better, at least in the American English language, the way we use it. And so it's such a great choice, but it also communicates what you're trying to communicate. So my next question is, how might someone know if they are highly sensitive or neurodivergent? What are some of the signs they should be looking for in themselves? Maybe a direct report, a partner, a child, a parent, anybody they live or work with or in their community.
I love this question, and it's a challenging one because part of the answer is it will look different in every single person that you meet. There is a saying in the neurodivergent community, if you've met one autistic person, if you've met one person with ADHD, if you've met one neurodivergent person, you've met one neurodivergent person. And one of the things that I've learned, certainly for myself and all of my clients and in all the research that I was doing for the book, there is no one singular way that any of these things shows up. There are certain, and I'll add to that for many reasons, still, even in 2025, in advanced society, there are many reasons why people may not want to disclose if they have these traits, whether they know it or not. There are self-assessments that are available online, and they come in a bunch of different flavors. High sensitivity is different from different kinds of neurodivergence, although one of the things that I uncovered in my research is that high sensitivity is a form of neurodivergence because our brains are actually wired differently. But again, the language is, I believe that everyone should be able to self-identify and choose the labels in the language that they're comfortable with and not have to take on something that doesn't resonate for them. There is a website called sensitivityresearch.com. I think it's .com. It might be .org. I'll have to check that again. It's been a while since I've looked at it. That has an online assessment that people can take for high sensitivity. It's quick, it's immediate, and you can find out whether you are highly sensitive or not. Generally, people who are highly sensitive have known it in some way since childhood. There are things that they have always noticed that other people around them weren't necessarily noticing. So If someone, for example, has always been sensitive to certain kinds of sounds and gets bothered by sounds that other people around them don't notice, or if they can smell things in the air around them immediately when other people don't notice those smells. There are other kinds of traits that come with this, like the ability to read a room and understand nonverbal communication and what's going on with people. Empathy is a trait that is typically very, very, very strong in people who are highly sensitive. All kinds of empathy. Intuition. One of the things that is going on in the highly sensitive brain, or that's actually not going on in the highly sensitive brain, is we are filtering out less information that's coming from our environment than other people. We just have fewer filters in place. So what that means is we're downloading tons and tons and tons of different data that most people are just filtering out. We are observing more, and we're also making connections among those data. So it can come across as very strong intuition or strategic thinking, being several steps ahead, understanding where something is going to be going several steps down the line. So anyone who has shown any of those traits or felt any of those things for most of their lives probably is highly sensitive. Neurodivergence in general, as an umbrella term, is a little bit more complicated because there are so many different traits that fall under it. So the most common ones that we know about are ADHD and autism and dyslexia and dyscalculia, which is dyslexia with numbers instead of with letters. There are a whole long list more of them that fall under the neurodivergence category. And there are self-assessments. You can just Google, self-assessment for adults ADHD, and you can find a bunch of things. Same thing with autism, same thing for other things. When you get into wanting to get assessed by professionals, it gets a little more complicated. And that's also where there is a difference between high sensitivity and neurodivergence, because a lot of medical professionals do not recognize high sensitivity as falling under the neurodivergent umbrella. So there is no diagnosis. It's not something a medical professional can tell you that you have, which is very different from, the ADHD and autism and other traits. And that said, there are a lot of reasons why people either don't want to or have difficulty getting professional assessments for the other things. So that becomes sort of a complicated can of worms.
For sure. Especially when, we have in many countries laws around people who are living with disabilities. Here we have the ADA in the United States. So I guess if you can't have a proper diagnosis for being a highly sensitive person, and yet you know that you are one, your family's known this, all of your workmates know this because you're very empathic, and you might be somebody who's more likely to start crying when other people can sort of hold it together and emotionally regulate. There's all these types of things that could go on, right? And so if it's not considered an actual disability, it makes it tricky, right? If we're talking about managers and workplaces. And so, are these something employees should disclose to their managers or HR? What is your thought around that?
So that's a question that I get a lot. It's something that I cover in the book. The answer is, like so many things, it depends. There is no requirement to disclose anything. And so much of it depends on how safe you feel with your manager, with your HR team, in your environment, in general. I have a really dry throat today. So there are a lot of things about, especially workplace environments, that can be challenges for people who are highly sensitive. The open office plans, open plan offices are a nightmare a lot of the time for people who are highly sensitive for so many reasons.
Especially with these return to offices that have been happening here in Silicon Valley. The extension from 3 to even 5 days has caused a lot in the neurodivergent community to be concerned about their productivity, obviously, right?
Absolutely. And productivity is going down and stress is going up, and the amount of overwhelm itself is huge for a lot of people. So if someone feels that their manager might be receptive to learning about something that could help the employee be more productive and more effective and happier in their role and doing their work, then I would suggest, by all means, try having a conversation with them. You might even want to give them a book or some information to help them understand what the trait really means and how that can manifest and how it can affect their day-to-day functioning as well as their work. If you are in a place where you don't feel safe, or your manager isn't particularly empathetic or responsive, then you have to figure out what the risk versus reward ratio is, right? If there's a chance that you might be able to get some sort of accommodation, whether it's working from home more often or changing your commute hours, flexing your hours so that you can come in at a less overwhelming time or when there's less traffic. If you might be able to get a quieter space in the office or reserve a conference room or something like that, then I would suggest bringing it up. But again, feel it out, use your intuition and use your ability to read people and your understanding of people to really get a sense beforehand of how it might be taken and whether you're safe in sharing this information.
Yes, that's such a good piece of advice. Obviously, HR is different all over the world, and the laws in every state, even the United States, are different, and every company approaches it differently. What we hope, at least here as difference makers, is that we're being human-centered, whatever that looks like, wherever we live in the world and wherever we work. At least in the U.S., I think we had some statistics I saw recently that said, I think it's like 1 in 4 adults is living with a form of a disability. And yet there's so much more underrepresented in our workforce, which is really bad for organizations because we're missing out on the traits that you mentioned, which are superpowers, which is a word maybe not everybody wants to use. But with some of the living with disabilities also comes certain advantages. We could go into each of the different ones and describe what those might be. But the reality is we are missing out on those traits if we're not trying to provide an environment where people can work and do the work in the best way that they can. You talk about these gifts and these superpowers that these traits bring. Maybe you want to go into some of them and how they add value in leadership or in the workplace itself.
Absolutely. Most of the leaders I work with personally are some of the most beloved leaders in their company. And the reasons for that are because they are so empathetic, because they care so much for the people on their teams as individuals. They get to know them, they understand what motivates them, they understand what their goals are. They try to help them develop and learn and grow. And I mentioned before the ability to read a room. So these are the leaders that you want, especially when you are dealing with challenging times, as we all are right now, and as every company is right now. You need these people who understand what people need, who can communicate in a way that lets people know that they're seen and that they're heard and that their concerns are valid and justified and being addressed. And, communications professionals, people who understand the kinds of questions that are going to come up when a reorg is going to happen or when changes are happening. Changes of all kinds are happening all the time, right? That is the one constant. So people who understand what employees need, what team members need to be able to adjust to the change, to be able to move forward, to be able to feel supported and comfortable in their roles and in their workplaces. These are the leaders that employees love and will follow if those leaders decide that it's time to go somewhere else where they are more valued and appreciated and where they can contribute more effectively. So I see this all the time. I also see a lot of these leaders, again, when I talk about two sides of the coin, it comes out in so many ways. So another side of this is when these leaders themselves are in situations that are toxic or they are really struggling to feel heard and seen, and they're looking for other opportunities. Sometimes what stops them is that they want to continue to be the buffer for their team. They want to take care of the people that they are leading, sometimes to their own disadvantage. It sometimes costs them to do this. So again, they're beloved for a lot of reasons. They also, back to the making connections and the combination of both intuition and receiving a lot of data and connecting the dots in ways that are not necessarily obvious to other people. There are drawbacks to this, and I have examples of them, but the advantages are huge. You can understand the possible repercussions of a strategic decision or of a business move several steps down the line before many other people can. The difficulty with that is that if you can't explain how you know what you know, in some environments, you're it's not going to be as easy to be heard. And this is something that a lot of my clients struggle with too. And I've experienced myself. It's very hard to come across as a fortune teller and not be able to tell where you're getting where you're from. Creativity. You were talking before about just, the companies missing out on people who are not in the workforce. Even within the workforce, there are plenty of people who have not disclosed and won't disclose on surveys or anything like that. So I actually believe that the numbers are much higher within the workforce, and they are some of the unhappiest people in the workforce because they can't ask for accommodation or won't or don't feel safe to ask for it, or they ask for it and don't get it. There are different kinds of abilities that come with the different traits, but some of the things that are fairly consistent are just general creativity, being able to come up with out-of-the-box solutions. Pattern recognition is one that we hear about a lot. Being able to see, the connections, it keeps coming back to the connections between things and possible patterns going forward, and being able to, work with strategic thinking. And that can be true in any role or in any field. I mean, a lot of people think about pattern recognition in terms of engineering, but there are other ways to use that. So that's an enormous strength.
Well, considering how many engineers we have in Silicon Valley and how many I personally know and work with, it is a very strong skill that is needed. And yet they say, I think you can expect about 80% of engineers to probably be neurodivergent in some form or fashion. So it is very common even in that field. And it's a highly respected field and one that's not going away anytime soon. Even with the evolution of AI, we still need our engineers as much as we ever have. And so it's all a matter, I think, of educating ourselves, really understanding, increasing awareness. And our country here in the United States, we have not done a great job of training our children in schools in empathy. There's a lot of cultural reasons for that, but I think we're reaping what we've sown, unfortunately, right now. And whereas I just visited Denmark a few months ago, and they teach their children empathy in school, and a lot of cooperation, and their hygge culture is very egalitarian. And so they have little kids in elementary school listen to each other's perspectives, if they're having something go on with their family or in their friend group, and they empathize with each other. And so then when you have a neurodivergent individual in that community, they're going to be experienced differently throughout their school years and in the work environment and community. Whereas our very competitive, where it's individualistic and it's training children in school to, excel at the expense of others, whether it's even on sports teams, we have these heroes in the sports team instead of the team. We often celebrate the individuals. And so, it just shows up very differently in a culture like this to have these situations. And so all of you listening around the world, whether you've been in the United States or not, you may know this about us. We don't keep some things very secret, but you've lived in other countries, I understand. And so, and you have a lot of deep experience in, a lot of inclusion and helping people with belonging and this type of thing and intercultural communication. I wonder, how has your global perspective and mindset really shaped the way you're currently coaching highly perceptive leaders?
That's a great question. I don't think it has consciously. I think unconsciously it's shaped everything that I do. As you mentioned, I've lived in 9 different countries and in some very, very different cultures. And I've also studied 9 languages, although I can't say that I actually speak them, but I've studied them enough so that at one point I was conversational in most of them. I am always fascinated by the way language reflects cultural values. My outlook is, I'm thinking as I'm talking because I'm trying to figure out how to best answer your question. I think I'm always focused on how we can be more inclusive, both when we're talking about a team and, in a work environment, and when we are looking at ourselves. So interestingly, there is some research that I learned about in a book called The Brain of the Highly Sensitive Person by a Dutch researcher named Esther Bergsma. And Esther, I actually spoke with her for the book too. We had a couple of very long conversations, and she's wonderful, and I highly recommend her book to anybody who's interested in this. She talks a lot more about the actual brain science and research than I do. There was a study done with a group of Americans and a group of Japanese. And within each group, there were people who were assessed as highly sensitive and people who were not. The American group who were highly sensitive tested similarly to both groups of the Japanese participants. The only group that was different was the Americans who were not highly sensitive. And what came out of this was the brains of highly sensitive people optimize for successful group outcomes rather than individual outcomes. So, as you know, I'm sure from your international experience, there are cultures that are more collectivist, that focus on the group. And then there are cultures like ours, and ours is one of the extremes on the individualist side. And people, even within our individualist culture, who are more highly sensitive, tend to be more focused on the group. So those leaders, for example, that I was talking about, who are concerned about leaving their own toxic situations because they still want to take care of their team members. It's a great example of the inclusive way that some people are naturally oriented. And I love your description too of the children in Denmark who are taught very early on to learn empathy and to show empathy. God, I would love that if we did something similar here in the United States. It would, we do reap what we sow. So back to your question. I think I've been babbling a little bit. I'm not sure I answered it directly, but I think it's just naturally part of my perspective and part of my outlook. And it's just, I've always considered myself a global citizen. And it's honestly these days, without saying too much, it's a little bit harder to be an American because of some things that are going on right now.
Yes. I am in that camp as well, and many of our listeners are. So whether they're Americans that vote abroad, like I did for many years, and you probably did too. Yes, it is a troubling situation because suddenly politics is everywhere and involves everything from business to where your kids go to school, whether California schools are getting their funding this year from the federal government, which they're not. So the 10% cut, all these things are happening that are just affecting everyday lives. So everything feels political. And, we see a lot more bullying in schools, and I don't know what the stats are, but, many of us who probably observed bullying in our schools, whether you were in the United States or I was in international schools overseas, but we would watch movies, especially in the 80s and 90s, and there you would see bullying on American high schools on the movies and such. And, so often it is people in this category of what we're talking about, very perceptive people who somehow, because they're different, I'm putting that in quotes if you can't see the video, they're getting crushed because the empathy hasn't been taught. And so when you have lack of empathy, both from the White House, down and throughout the manosphere on social media and podcasting and et cetera, and then you haven't taught these skills of empathy or even raised awareness about what it means to be living with disabilities or neurodivergent or perceptive or whatever the words are, I think you're going to see more of that. The other thing we're seeing more of, and this is a huge conversation, not just in Silicon Valley, but even globally in our workforces, it's something, very common to many of us, which is burnout. And you speak about this often. What are some of the unique risks that you think highly perceptive or even neurodivergent leaders face when it comes to burnout? And what strategies have you found most effective for managers to help these, or maybe they're direct reports of ours, maybe it's our own manager, or just people we work with, or maybe it's us listening. What strategies have you found most effective in preventing it?
So this is a topic that I am really, really, really passionate about. Myself experienced burnout multiple times in a very, very severe way and didn't always know what was happening at the time. Didn't even have the language for it at first, because the first time it really affected me in the workforce was in 2014 when I wasn't particularly on a lot of social media, and it just the word wasn't used as much and it wasn't heard as much as it is today. So I really didn't understand what was happening to me until much later. But in my case, I was a director at a global Fortune 500. I was managing a team of people around the world. I was working a crazy number of hours. I had no personal life. I had a boss who would, email at 2 or 3 in the morning, and my own inner compulsion was, I need to get on it as soon as I see it. So I wasn't necessarily checking email at 2 or 3 in the morning, but it was very hard to disengage and, turn off. Again, I've always been someone who's driven myself really, really hard. I ended up burning myself out so severely that I had to quit my job and leave my home because there was no way that I could pay a mortgage without working full time. And I really, really needed the time off. I was basically non-functional when it came down to it. And one of the things that I have learned is that people who are more highly sensitive and more perceptive and neurodivergent, in addition to all of the factors that we all know about that lead to burnout, so toxic work environments or toxic bosses, being spread too thin, having too many responsibilities and not being able to prioritize. There are a lot of things that we know about that factor in. On top of that, those of us who are wired differently can experience something called neurodivergent burnout. And one of the things that makes this different, first of all, it can be much more severe and it can last a lot longer than, I'm going to just say, garden variety burnout without meaning to disparage that, because I know how serious it is in general. But neurodivergent burnout can really be a lot more dramatic and drastic. And part of what causes it is masking. It is spending years and possibly a lifetime trying to be something that you're not, or pretending to be something that you're not, or taking on a persona. And often it sounds very contrived the way that I'm talking about it right now. Most often, a lot of this is completely unconscious. It's not something that we're doing intentionally. We have been programmed from very early ages and because we are so naturally observant, we have watched and observed what kinds of behaviors were considered acceptable and what kinds of behaviors weren't. And if we fall anywhere outside of that, we tend to take on, and there's some interesting research going on about whether women do this more or differently than men too, because one of the things that comes up, and I know I just interrupted myself, I'll come back to it, but authenticity is a trait that is very, very, very important to neurodivergent people. We tend to really dislike pretense of any kind. Some of us are just not capable of it. I have no poker face is a phrase that comes up a lot with a lot of people who are highly sensitive and or neurodivergent. We need to be ourselves. And yet, because we're so good at seeing what works in the general world, what's acceptable and what's not, we may unconsciously mask those behaviors that would not necessarily be seen as acceptable and take on other personas. And when you're talking with a specific population, for example, women leaders in corporate workplaces, there's already a level of masking a lot of the time, because so many of us, of this population, have really not had role models other than men in those leadership roles. And so we may unconsciously be taking on a lot of the behavior that we see. So double down on that, and then you get people who are trying to behave differently because one of the things you mentioned earlier was, we may cry more easily, for example. We may be more sensitive to emotions. We may, when there's a layoff situation, yes, everyone's upset, but it can also, a manager who is more highly sensitive may get very, very emotional in delivering news to people on their team whom they have to lay off. Whereas it might not affect others that way at all. A lot of highly sensitive and neurodivergent people try to mask that behavior because they have seen the consequences for people who don't mask it. And that masking takes so much energy, both physical energy and emotional and psychological energy. And doing that month after month, year after year, is a huge factor in neurodivergent burnout. So you asked what any of us can do to help mitigate it or prevent it. One of the most important things that individuals can do is to really embrace their own wiring and understand their own needs and address those needs. A lot of people dismiss the concept of self-care as being fluffy and as being, taking a long vacation or, an expensive spa retreat. To me, self-care is understanding your own needs, your physical needs, your spiritual needs, your emotional needs, your psychological needs, all of them as a whole human being, and doing what you need to do to address them. And particularly the women who I work with who are highly sensitive often tell me they feel guilty doing that. They feel guilty taking time for themselves or setting boundaries or taking a day off, whatever it is they need. The most important thing you can do to prevent burnout is to take that time and to recognize your need for it and to honor that. And you have to put on your own oxygen mask before you can help anyone else, right? So if you're not taking care of basic needs, if you're not taking care of your basic needs, you are not going to be able ultimately to take care of all of the other people that you just naturally take care of or want to take care of. So for the individuals, it's, again, learning more, understanding and recognizing and embracing the way you're wired and your needs. For those who are managers and leaders and people in HR, keeping an eye on those who tend to be the hardest workers, who tend to not take as much vacation time, who tend to take on all of the extra responsibilities that nobody else wants to do on top of their regular jobs. Reaching out to those people and saying, hey, how are you really? Not just, how are you? Fine, thank you. How are you? But how are you really doing? And hey, I noticed you haven't taken a vacation at all this year. I would really encourage you to take some time. We will figure out how to backfill for you, how to make sure that your responsibilities are covered, how to make sure that your team is taken care of and has what they need, and that nothing falls through the cracks when you're away. And same thing, if you see people working late at night or answering emails at crazy times in the morning, there are policies that can be set organization-wide that benefit not only the people who are highly sensitive and neurodivergent, but everyone. Like Ariana Huffington had a policy at HuffPo where no one was allowed to send emails, at night, basically. They set hours where you just could not communicate via email. Things like that are super helpful.
They are. And some companies do company-wide days off or week off during the December holiday time, all types of things. And as you mentioned, these accommodations benefit everyone because in a culture where, especially here in Silicon Valley, we work too hard, but we're only human. And as much as our technology has advanced and we're partnering with AI, we've not changed the very fact that we are finite human beings with limitations. And whatever type of brain or nervous system wiring we have, or culture we've grown up in, or what our gender is, we all are human. And that's kind of what this podcast is about, bringing our humanity to center it, to help us understand it. We all live different ways in our different cultures with our, beautiful diversity of all types, not just the neurodiversity, but like you mentioned, cognitive diversity just means we all think differently, really. And so the thoughts we bring to the table and our perspectives really matter. And so thank you for sharing yours with us today. You've given us so much understanding. I hope it's only piqued your curiosity out there, difference makers. And I hope you continue to have the conversation in your workplaces, in your families, in your communities, because this is the kind of beginning of a conversation. And please pick up Rachel's book, which is excellent, called Perceptive, and let us know what you think. I'm going to have you hang out with our difference makers for a little bit, but thank you so much, Rachel, for being here with us today.
My pleasure, Lori. Thank you.
If today's conversation with Rachel Radway really struck a chord, imagine what could happen if you fully embraced the way you're wired. Her book, Perceptive, isn't just a book. It's a roadmap for turning your sensitivity, your depth, and your unique way of thinking into a competitive advantage in leadership and life. It talks about your differentiator, what makes you different and unique, and what you're bringing to the table, which is what we always discuss here on A World of Difference as we make differences together. At tables where we make decisions and bring our perspectives. And if you're perceptive with your perspective, what a superpower that is. I'm still thinking about the moment she said that as she has coached many people and has experienced the corporate environment, how many people are experiencing the world and the work environment differently because they have less filters. Even just that should give us empathy to try to seek to understand the way people are experiencing our own workplaces very differently than us. And it should also help us want to include their perspectives when we understand they may be more perceptive about something that we have dismissed, such as a strategy that they have been able to see a pattern in, or they've been able to see around the corner about the way the market is going and really open us up to a blue ocean strategy to get us out of that red ocean with all the sharks. And if you're not familiar with that, go look up Blue Ocean Strategy, which was a book written by a couple of NCED professors in business. And it's a very helpful understanding of how markets work. But maybe if people are more perceptive, they're able to find those blue ocean strategies in a different way. So keep listening to understand their perspectives. And you also bringing in their insights of how perceptive they are so that you can learn more in your workplace about how to do the work you do better in a more human-centered way, but also in a way that's more successful. The kind of insight that she shared about that and those filters is really the kind that just stays with you. At least it has with me. And so if you think this was good, you really haven't heard the rest, because over on our exclusive Patreon interview, Rachel shares this probably never before told story and moment where she unpacks a question that I asked her about in writing the book Perceptive, what she saw, this raw behind the scenes insight into how leaders are either stifling or helping to bring out the superpowers within people that are perceptive. And I really want you to hear her answer to that question. It's the kind of answer that'll make you rethink what's possible and come up with calls to action for yourself as a manager, maybe working in a disaster zone in international disaster relief, or maybe somebody who's teaching a classroom starting this new semester. I want you to see what's possible for your own leadership journey. So please grab your copy of Perceptive, connect with Rachel, and then head to our Patreon to get the rest of this conversation. The world needs more leaders like you, and I want you to have every advantage out there to continue to grow in your own leadership, authentically and with your own differentiators as you bring out the differentiators and those that you work with and all around every single day. Take care and keep making a difference wherever you are. Hey, real quick before you go, if this episode made you think, made you feel, or made a difference in your day, here's how you can make a difference too. Send this episode to 5 people right now. Seriously, 5 people in your text threads, Slack channel, or group chat who care about making the world better. You never know who needs to hear this today. And if you haven't yet, hit that follow button so you don't miss the next conversation. Then scroll down, tap 5 stars, and leave a quick review. I read every single one, and your words help this show reach more difference makers just like you. Remember, your voice moves mountains. Sharing, rating, and reviewing, it's not just support, it's activism. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being you. And most of all, thanks for making a world of difference. Here on A World of Difference, we talk a lot about what it means to show up with courage, especially when the world tells us to stay silent. But here's the truth. Healing isn't meant to happen in isolation. We all carry stories of joy, of pain, of resilience. And sometimes we need a space that's just for us, a space where we feel safe to process, to breathe, to be. And that's why I believe in therapy. And that's why I'm so grateful to partner with BetterHelp, online therapy that meets you wherever you are. BetterHelp matches you with a licensed therapist based on your unique needs, whether you're dealing with burnout, grief, relationships, or simply trying to make sense of your story. Because you matter, and your story deserves to be heard. As a listener of this podcast, you can get 10% off your first month at www.betterhelp.com/difference. Again, that's betterhelp.com/difference, because you don't have to walk this road alone. Hey, difference makers, quick question. Have you ever felt stuck in your job? Like you're meant for more, but you just don't really know how to make that leap? It's scary. Maybe you've outgrown your role, your industry, or even your workplace culture, and you're really craving a career that actually aligns with who you are and the impact you want to make. I've been there. And after coaching professionals across 3 continents and leading in everything from global nonprofits to Silicon Valley tech, I created something just for you. It's called Master the Career Pivot, my signature course designed to help mission-driven, values-driven professionals like you make bold, values-aligned moves without losing yourself in the process. This course isn't about polishing your LinkedIn profile. It's about finding clarity, recovering from burnout, and reconnecting to your sense of purpose. It's about joining a community of others who are making bold pivots too, because you don't have to do this alone. Whether you're navigating a toxic workplace, returning to work after time away, or just sensing that it's time for meaningful change, this course will give you the tools and the psychological safety to move forward with confidence. I've built this program around what I know helps: reflection, expert guidance, and here's the fun part, asking you to offer advice to others going through the same thing. Why? Because science shows we gain clarity when we help others, and that sense of belonging and purpose, well, that's where the magic happens. So if you're ready to go from stuck to aligned, from exhausted to energized, go to loriadamsbrown.com/career pivot and join the Master the Career Pivot course today. And if someone just popped into your mind who's in that messy middle, forward this episode to them. You could be the reason they finally say yes to change.